Is AI going to take creative jobs? What will the industry look like in the next 10, 20 to 50 years? Well, in this episode of Design Ahead, we'll take a calculated look at the future of AI. So welcome back to Design Ahead with me, Jake Fernandes, and today we're going to be talking about the future of AI. Now, we probably already know about things like ChatGPT, Midjourney, and all of the technologies that we currently know and love today. Love being a subjective word. But what is going to be coming up in the future? What's the next 10 years going to look like? Especially for the creative industry, which seems to be one of these that unknowingly has become very much impacted by the evolution of AI. I think when everybody thought about this in the past 10 years, maybe 20 years, we all thought about AI being something that was going to be robotics and changing things like autonomous, self-driving vehicles, maybe the agricultural industry, the production industry as well. And it seems like design was one of those things that wasn't going to be impacted for a while. But here we are, we've got things like Midjourney, ChatGPT, and video sound creation softwares that are already really starting to threaten the industry. So if you follow AI leaders like Sam Altman, you'll already be aware of some concepts like artificial general intelligence, also known as AGI. And if you don't, we'll get into that a little bit in a moment. But it's an interesting one where we're kind of on this timeline that is starting with the current generation of AI, which is generative AI. We'll then move into two more stages that I'll get onto in a moment. And then from the third stage, it's kind of anyone's guess as to what's happening next. And before we've got to this stage where ChatGPT has kind of kicked off the new phase of AI, we definitely had some building blocks. You know, self-driving cars have been a thing for the past 10 years at the very least now. We've had different industries as well kind of capitalize on things like robotics. In particular, I mentioned agriculture, but production lines, building cars has definitely got some sort of automated AI in there. So getting to this first stage, we did have a lot of groundwork getting there. Of course, ChatGPT didn't just appear out of thin air. There was a lot of development that happened over the 2010s to get to the point where it was able to release GPT-3. Of course, we had GPT-1, GPT-2, although they weren't really publicly available and nobody knew too much about them outside of the industry. But what that was able to do is lay the foundations of what we would then build upon over the past couple of years. So these future ideas are very much calculated predictions. Like, nobody knows for sure what's going to happen. Nobody even knows if the world's going to be here tomorrow, never mind what's going to happen in 10 years. But what we can do is follow a logical process that AI is highly likely to follow. Of course, like I mentioned, the leaders of AI have discussed these in depth, getting to the point of artificial general intelligence and what that timeline might generally look like. There's a little bit of a pinch of salt. Certain industries will be further along this timeline than others. As I mentioned, self-driving cars are definitely further along the process than generative AI like ChatGPT and digital technologies. But everyone's going to kind of generally follow the same timeline here. So let's have a little look at that timeline. We are basically right at the start here. We're in phase one, which is generative AI. As I mentioned, this is your ChatGPT, your Midjourney, your DALL-E. It's being able to take on a human prompt, generate some content, and give it to the human at the other end. The second stage is automative AI, autonomous AI, however you want to call it. Essentially what this is thinking about self-driving cars. You put in an original prompt, it's able to do all of the hard work, all of the calculations, predictions, and get the end result at the end. It's a lot better than generative AI because you're not constantly fine-tuning it. It's generally, I want to do this exact task and it will perform it autonomously. And then finally, you have the innovative stage. And this is where things start to get scary. This could be the end game for us, really. This could be the point in which we turn into second-class citizens, if I'm really honest. It's the unpredictable nature, but what innovative AI means essentially is being able to create new ideas, being able to research things, propose brand new concepts that doesn't involve any human involvement. It's able to do all of this by itself off its own back. Now, it can be quite difficult to really understand what all of this means, but I think a really good analogy for this is learning a musical instrument. So you start off at the beginning of not knowing anything about the instrument. You maybe want to learn, let's say, guitar. And you would have a teacher telling you how to play the A chord and the finger patterns that you need to do to perform that action, or how to play a certain riff and the different notes that you've got to hit to play that riff. That's where we are currently with AI. That's the generative stage where we've got a teacher telling us what to do, where they're performing that action and, showing it to the teacher. She's saying brilliant, and that's essentially what we're getting back from AI, is that response. We say thank you very much, or we fine tune it to say that's not quite right, it's not really what I wanted, here's how I want you to get to that solution. So after you've started to play those chords from the teacher, you might then go online to find some of your favorite songs to practice and cover. So if I want to go and learn how to play Sweet Child of Mine, I will look up the guitar tabs and I will find out the exact notes I need to play, what order, how fast, and be able to match them up so I can play that guitar cover. That's where the Automative AI lies. It's the ability for it to find a template, its ability to understand this is the process it needs to complete and be able to execute that perfectly. But then if you want to write a solo in that song or improvise, it can be pretty difficult to do so. You might be able to pull it off, but if you have no understanding of music theory, it's going to be very difficult to write something innovative on top of that. And essentially that's where Automative AI lies. It can't really just riff and do its own thing. It really relies on that structure and that flow to complete that task to A to B. But that then brings you to the final stage, which is, as a musician, writing your own music and creating new ideas. You might have a range of influences. So if I wanted to start a band that maybe sounded like the Arctic Monkeys, I might have covered a bunch of their music. I might be able to understand the different chord structures that they use, the progression, and I'd be able to write something in the style of, and then creating my own style that is based upon theirs. And that's where the innovation happens. So if we look at that from an AI perspective, that's where it starts to think for itself. It's no longer creating covers. It's no longer being prompted by the user to do a certain thing. It's knowing, oh, this is cool, or this is something that's going to be quite useful. I'm going to investigate that a little bit more. I'm going to come up with my own ideas, and then I'm going to propose brand new ideas from that. And then from there, who knows, it could go absolutely any direction. This is where we start to think about human cyborgs, if I'm being completely honest, because there is a whole debate about how easy is it for AI to replicate the essential human qualities like emotion. Artificial general intelligence might get to a point where it is incredibly good at being able to predict certain emotions or replicate them, but it might never feel what we're able to feel because we have innate human chemistry. But I think that's a concept for another day. Let's just kind of focus on the next 10, 20, 30 years. Now let's break down each of these areas and look at what they do, what are their limitations, and their impacts on the creative industry in particular. So starting at the start, it would make sense to begin with generative AI. As I said before, generative AI is reliant on human prompts. So a human would come in, it would say, please write me this blog article or create this image that I'm, prompting you to do. So maybe create an illustration in the style of Pablo Picasso. And it would then take that prompt, it would obviously take a few extra things. If you're writing a image prompt, you might have certain characteristics, you might have a aspect ratio for it to follow, and it would then produce something at the other end, which at the moment is pretty damn good. There's a lot of technologies out there like the ones that I've already mentioned that are really good at creating content at this moment, very replicative of things that already exist. Of course, it's hard to generate brand new ideas that are pioneering anything. But how it works is it's able to mimic styles, it's able to predict sequences, and create cohesive outputs based on the vast amount of data that it has already been trained on. So we're at this phase now in 2024 of multimodal AIs. We have text generation like GPT, Gemini. We have image generation tools like Midjourney. We've also got sound and video generation that I think haven't been as much in the public limelight as the other two have for obvious reasons. I think they have a lot more of a niche audience. Sound generation is probably going to be things like creating musical tracks, replicating famous voices. So I'm sure everybody's heard the pretty funny Donald Trump impersonations where you can kind of write things in this and get the other end of the tone of his voice. Video generation as well is pretty rough around the edges. It's quite choppy. It's not as clean and sleek as some of the image generation stuff we already have. We've got tools like Runway Gen 2. I think Gen 3 is about to come out as well. There's leaps and bounds happening already within that space. I think some of the video generation that's already been proposed. I think Meta released something recently as well that looks pretty intelligent, but we're still not quite there as we are with chat and image generation. Now, look, one of the biggest problems is the ethics with this. There's a lot of people pushing back. There's whole movements in, for example, the Screen Actors Guild about image rights for AI generated films and content. The problem is that it's very difficult to resist these technologies. We've opened Pandora's box and we can't put it back into the box now. We're gonna have to live with it. It is going to compete with human creators. There's no getting around this. Another topic for another day, probably. But for now, these are the things that we have to face when we're looking at generative AI. So what are the limitations around this phase? Of course, human input is number one. It doesn't work without somebody telling it what to do. It can't think for itself. It can't just start generating stuff off the fly. It needs input. It needs to be told, this is what I want you to create, and then it could go through the process of doing that. The other problem is that it doesn't really understand context. It's a predictive tool. It predicts what is the next pattern or the next logical thing within this sequence. So one of the big problems that it did have until recently is the strawberry problem, where you would ask it how many R's are in the word strawberry, and it would reply 2. Of course, there's 3. So it was one of the things that was quite hard to iron out, and it was again based on pattern recognition. People think it was splitting strawberry into 2 words and then counting the 2 in berry but not the 1 in straw. They were able to fix that, and the release of GPT-4o definitely was able to combat a lot of these issues. It doesn't understand like another person does, it doesn't grasp context, it doesn't understand certain cues, it fails to really understand what is being said. It just predicts the response that it needs to give. Another big thing is that outputs lack originality. I've tried in the past for it to understand my tone of voice to help me with blog writing or creating content. And it's been good at helping me draft up plans. It's been helping me with research in particular, but creating a whole blog post is just something I think it really struggles to do in an original sense. What I have tried to do is feed it my tone of voice. So I've wrote a few blogs over the years. I've copied those into ChatGPT. I've asked it to analyze it, pick up on literary techniques that I use, such as triplets, connective words, anything that might help formulate the way in which I write or the way in which I speak. And it was able to do that. It was able to understand those concepts, but it was really bad at executing them in a style that is representative of me. It wrote very much like ChatGPT writes. And I think that's one of the fundamental difficulties it does face. I think over time it will start to learn. And as we move more into the automative state, it will be much better at, understanding a full picture, understanding those patterns and being able to replicate them like somebody's tone of voice. But we're not there yet. So what is its impact on the creative industry? Well, it's an enhancement, not a replacement. Generative AI serves as a tool to enhance your processors. It's not there to completely replace things like wireframing. I wouldn't use AI to solely create me wireframes or a prototype. I might use it to create mood boards or help me with some research, but I wouldn't expect it to do the things that I do as part of my core responsibilities. Graphic design is a bit of a sticky subject because we've had a few instances where large artists have been using generative AI for album covers, namely Tears for Fears and The Voids this year. They have obviously got budget for graphic design, they've got budget for photography and album artwork, and there is a huge uproar about them taking away that budget that would normally be given to original creators and saving it just by creating some AI images. Now, whether or not they paid people to create prompts is an interesting subject in itself, but this is fundamentally one of the issues, and the impacts that it is already having on our industry is that people are choosing to use generative AI over actual content creators. And then a quick word as well on new roles that are appearing slowly, which is prompt generation. I think in terms of image generation, this is a big one because you can put in some very specialist prompts that I think if you have a very good understanding of photography, or if you have a very good understanding of video production, you'll know that these prompts and you'll understand how to get to that point. So resolutions, frame rates, kind of things like that that you put into software that will produce you photography and videos, you're going to be able to have more control over the output. But for now, AI is essentially an assistant. It's there to help you improve your workflow. It's there to help you with idea generation, synthesis, but it's not generally completing full tasks that you would be expected to do. Phase 2 now, Automative AI. This is the one that we're kind of half in, but we're still kind of half out as well. There's different industries that are different points within this process, and I think this is the one that the most advanced industries like the self-driving vehicle industry and robotics industries, they're starting to reach the middle ground of this point, but things like technology, digital technologies and large language models definitely are getting to that point pretty rapidly as well. So as I mentioned, Automative AI is all about setting parameters, setting a framework for it to follow, and then providing a very basic action at the start, and it's able to execute that. Generally speaking, it doesn't really require any human input. You should be able to just say, I want to do this task, and it's able to perform it pretty much flawlessly. So some examples, as I mentioned, self-driving cars. If you have a self-driving Tesla, you can start off at home and say, I want to get to work, and it will make all of those calculations along the way. It will be able to understand speed limits, it will be able to understand surroundings, hazards, make an evaluated choice about direction as well. So if a certain road is closed off, it will take a second one. It's able to do all of those things and get you to that destination without requiring any input along the way. Factories as well, so if I've got a robot that's programmed to specifically fit car doors in a production line, it will be able to produce all of those tasks. It will be able to screw on the bolts, seal up any areas it needs to seal up. It will be able to do exactly what it's programmed to do. So almost replacing a factory worker in that sense. And customer support is an interesting one because is it automative? Is it still generative? It's kind of hard to really pinpoint this one. I'd say it's more on the side of automative because it doesn't really require any human prompts. It more looks for feedback and response. So if I'm cancelling my TV subscription, then I would go in there, it would ask me a question. I'd say I want to cancel my TV subscription. It might ask for my name, my postcode, I'd feed that back. And it would be able to perform that task by asking me for certain things, but I wouldn't be the one prompting it. I wouldn't be asking it to give me this question of what is your name, what is your address, what is your postcode. It's the other way around, it's back to front. Whether that's automative is still up for debate, but we can kind of put it in that 1.5 category. So the major limitations around automative AI is that it struggles with anything that isn't pre-planned or programmed within it. If it's faced with a question or it's kind of out of its remit that it's already been planned to do, then it's really going to struggle or it's not going to answer it at all. And this is where the human intervention comes in. So although it's a lot better now, if a car is heading for disaster and it could either drive you into a tree or it could drive you into a burning lorry, is it going to make the right decision? What is the right decision? And I think that's where human input comes in. It's a pretty morbid example, but I hope you get what I'm getting at. Anything that requires human judgment, automative AI is really going to struggle. There's also a high initial cost to get involved within this. I think, again, automative AI was really beneficial within the car industry, but other industries haven't been able to catch on as quickly because there is a large cost to get to this point. That's why we're seeing digital technologies start to get there slowly, but we haven't just immediately jumped to this point with ChatGPT and Midjourney. And in particular, smaller organizations are really not going to be able to get their hands on this technology for a long, long time. As soon as we get the larger companies capitalizing on new technologies, those older technologies are passed down to be made more accessible and cheaper for newer companies to get involved with. And of course, there's another ethical issue of human involvement. If you've got an automated car, at what point do you remove the human behind the wheel? Because at the moment, we do still have a human there that's able to take control if something goes wrong. But when do we not require somebody to be sitting there? I think we might be getting to this point with robotic taxis as well. We're just about getting there, but these are big ethical considerations. If we're looking in healthcare, if we've got a robotic doctor performing a surgery, at which point do we just leave it to its own devices to complete by itself? There's a lot of ethics that need to be considered with this, as we do with every part of the process. So what is its impact within the creative industry? Well, we have a few examples that are becoming more apparent as time goes on and as these technologies improve. Post-production's a really interesting one. Now, I know from a music side that post-production is starting to become a little bit more automated. We have releases like Isotope 10, I think Isotope 11, it could be out now, I can't remember off the top of my head, but Isotope is a post-production software. It's mainly made for mastering, and it has a lot of technologies like compressors. It has EQs, limiters, everything that you might need for post-production. And what it's able to do is master my track. It's able to get to that point where it's made some calculated decisions. It's been able to apply compression, EQ, and a limiter at the end, which gets you to the point of an official master. And I have also heard that in the film industry, there are some technologies that help with post-production within movies and videos. Although I'm not too sure on what those technologies are currently like. I don't know how commonly they're used, but I imagine they're getting to a point where you can pop something in, you get a product at the end, and then just critique whether it's good enough or maybe need to make some slight adjustments. And finally, we get to innovative AI. We get to the end game. Well, let's see if it is the end game truly. But this is all about the self-learning. This is all about it being able to continuously improve on itself without any human input. It's much closer to human intuition. It is able to conduct research. It can propose novel solutions and potentially create brand new ideas and solutions that we would never have thought of. It could genuinely start to answer some of the fundamental questions about the universe and provide some very good research to back it up as well. So, it's not all doom and gloom. It could really just answer some of the fundamental questions we've never been able to answer. And this is where we start to get artificial general intelligence. It thinks for itself. It knows what's best for itself, what its ethics are, what it's built on. So, is it going to destroy humanity? Is it going to work with us? That's kind of up to the robot itself. It's up to the general intelligence for it to decide. So some of the main areas for this, of course, we have scientific research. If it's able to create brand new research, if it's able to evolve based on some of the limitations that we were able to get to as humans, of course, those will be excelled based on our use of generative AI and autonomous AI as well, but it might be able to get to a point where it can start to think for itself and really come up with brand new ideas that we never would have considered. Creative composition as well goes back to that idea of a musician. It'll be able to create brand new styles. It'll be able to create sounds and songs that we might never have thought of before, and my God, they'll be pretty captivating once it gets to a good point. And also interestingly, self-improving software. So let's say we ask this AI to develop a role-playing game. It will release a base version of the game, but the innovative AI kicks in when it starts to create brand new content. So it might create a new area, it might create new weapons or armor or new storylines. And that's where the innovation really starts to thrive. So what are the limitations for this? Well, the big one is that we don't know what it's going to do. It's going to be totally unpredictable because it's going to have its own intelligence. It'll have its own standards, its own morals, its own ethics. And if they align with us or not, it's totally up to it. We don't really have any involvement in that. It's the black box problem. Once we get to that point, will we have any control over what this AI does? Who knows? I think for the early stages, we will still, of course, have some involvement. But once it's doing its own thing, there might be no stopping it. It's up to it to decide if it wants to work with us or against us. And of course, the elephant in the room is that it's going to surpass us. There's no question about it. It will surpass human intelligence, no problem. So what impact does it have on the creative industry? And let's just focus in on that early adoption part. I think it's very easy to say that every industry in the world will be completely changed. It will be under threat once we get to the later stages. But for the first part, it will create brand new art forms, things that we haven't seen before, art, film, music, literature. AI will start to create some really interesting and cool ideas. And what does that mean for us? Well, I think we get more autonomy. I think that a lot of the tasks we do today, a lot of the roles that we do today are essentially creating processes, creating outputs that achieve a goal. If we're not needed to do that anymore, it frees up so much time and effort for us to be a bit more free. We can have more time. We don't have to work 5 days a week, 7 hours a day. We would have a lot more time to do whatever we want. In the perfect world where everything works out, AI would just be able to run the world on its own and we can do whatever we want. And that is the perfect world, and that's the one I really hope we do achieve. And it may still rely on human AI collaboration. That's where we get into cyborg territory. That's where we start to put AI within our bodies, and we might work as a vessel for it to thrive on human emotion. We also might be able to flip that around and become super intelligent AI ourselves. So that's where we start to get into really interesting territory. And hopefully, if you're watching this, we're around to see that together. But I think that's a great point to call it for today. So thank you so much for watching this episode of Design Ahead. It's been really interesting to look into the future, and that's the nervously exciting part, I think, not knowing what's going to happen and thinking about all of these amazing things, the question of, is there an afterlife? Well, you could be uploaded to the cloud and become a super intelligent AI yourself. Who knows what's going to happen, but maybe we can explore it in another podcast. But for now, do follow me at Let's Design Ahead on Instagram, TikTok, where I do create a lot of short form content. Subscribe if you haven't already. Please drop a like or a rating wherever you get this podcast, and I will catch you guys in the next episode.